Welcome, everybody, back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Manny Maradiege, here on Friday, February the 7th, the last weekday until the big game. It almost feels like it's Christmas Eve, the way I'm excited for this game, with obviously the Super Bowl coming up on Sunday. A lot has been said, there's not much more you can delve into other than, just watching the game already, it feels like. But on today's schedule, we got some more Super Bowl talk. We're going to preview the Super Bowl for the final time here and go into all the details around the game. We're going to recap the NFL honors from last night and some interesting talking points from the awards, along with a couple more things on today's show. So make sure to stick around for all of it. And before we get started, a opportunity for you guys. If you guys want to get involved with the show with any questions, comments, or any opinions you'd like to share on the air, please don't hesitate to do so. Let your voice be heard, and any insights or just thoughts that you have running across your head are always well appreciated and well received, right? And if you want to make it absolutely sure that your message stands out and not only is seen by me but gets featured on the show, there's an easy way to do that just by using the Super Chat feature. The Super Chat feature allows you to be part of the show. Just click the $sign at the bottom of the chat box to send in your Super Chat. In this way, it guarantees that I'm able to see your message, I'll read it out loud, and get your guys' feeling or perspective on anything that we're talking about on any of the live shows, right? So again, let us know what you're thinking. Hit the Super Chat button, and let's keep this show as interactive and as exciting as possible. We want to know what you guys are thinking. We want to know what's on your mind, so please don't hesitate, again, to let it be known, and we can have a discussion that way, get a different perspective or point of view on whatever we're talking about during these shows. So, with that, your first opportunity to do that is with the NFL honors last night, right? There was the annual award show for the NFL, and we had, a few talking points from the awards and, who got them at the end of the night. And the most talk, right, is surrounding the MVP, and we're going to get to that. But the other winners, Offensive Player of the Year went to Saquon, Defensive Player of the Year to Pat Surtain, Offensive Rookie of the Year to Jaden Daniels, Defensive Rookie of the Year, Jared Verse, Comeback Player of the Year, Joe Burrow, Coach of the Year, Kevin O'Connell, and then Eric Armstead got the big honor of winning the Walter Payton Man of the Year. So that was awesome to see. Very much deserved for all the winners. But there was some talking points you could definitely take away from a few of these awards. A couple of them were pretty self-explanatory, but we're gonna go through them and just give our thoughts on them. So first off, we're gonna save the MVP till the last one because that's has the most to talk about. But the Offensive Player of the Year, an absolutely stacked group here, and insane seasons from Lamar and Joe, obviously, Derrick Henry, a quiet, almost 2,000 yards, just like it was nothing. Jamar Chase winning the Triple Crown, and yeah, Saquon won this award, very well deserved, right? Because he should have broke the rushing record, but he was rested the last game, so regardless of that, he had a lot of big moments, a lot of big runs, and just MVP type of moments in this season. So giving him the Offensive Player of the Year, I'm not really too upset about, but I thought it was a little ridiculous how Jamar Chase didn't get a single first place vote from anybody. Like, I know he might not have won, but the guy got the Triple Crown this season. So only 4 or 5 other people ever did that in NFL history. So for people to just kind of brush that off like it was nothing is a bit, I don't know, short-sighted, I would say. Again, even if he wasn't going to win, no first place votes for Jamar is kind of insane to me. So, that was that. Joe, hard to win it with a losing record. Derek, I don't know. I feel like nobody really talked about him that much. And Lamar, he was up for MVP, and he had a great season, but I don't know. I'd always felt like he was just a shoo-in for MVP and only really that award for consideration. Because, if you're going to give a quarterback this award too, it almost feels like it's too much, right? You got to give somebody else an award too, not just the quarterback. So this one was always going to go to someone else, and I was glad it was Saquon. Defensive Player of the Year, I was very happy that it was Pat Surtain because it usually just goes to a pass rusher, and none of them really had like an amazing, historical season or anything like that. Trey Hendrickson had a career year. That was cool to see. Myles Garrett did his thing. TJ did his thing. Zach Bond would have been an exciting pick, just because he kind of came out of nowhere, and he's only on a one-year deal with Philly. So if he got it after winning or after earning first-team All-Pro, would have been pretty cool, but maybe a bit of a stretch. So Pat Surtain to win it, he becomes only the second defensive back to win it since 2009. The last one to do it was Stephon Gilmore in 2019, although it should have been TJ Watt, but, it is what it is. And, DBs should get more consideration, I feel like, because they don't really get the numbers because nobody really throws at them if they're doing a fantastic job like Pat Surtain did this year, but it's nice to see the recognition, and it was well-deserved, again, for a still pretty young guy making a big name for himself already, probably the best corner in the game as of today. So moving on from that, I think the most obvious award of the night was Offensive Rookie of the Year. Obviously was going to go to Jaden Daniels. He got 49 of the 50 first-place votes, and yes, this award was very much deserved for him, but also, to have three LSU guys up there was pretty cool. LSU, a lot of dominance from LSU recently, right? Malik, Brian Thomas was awesome. Now Jaden, obviously Joe, Jamar, and Justin all doing their thing. So that was kind of cool to see up there with three LSU guys up there. But yeah, Offensive Rookie of the Year was always going to go to Jaden. Then Defensive Rookie of the Year went to Jared Verse, first Rams Defensive Rookie of the Year since Aaron Donald in 2014. Not bad company to be in at all. And there was a little bit of a dip in performance halfway through the season where I thought maybe Quinyon Mitchell could make a run at it, but, Jared Verse ended up getting 37 of the first place votes, and Quinyon only got 7. So I think still, despite all of that, Jared made a good case for himself, and he's part of a very exciting young defensive line group over there. And he's already one of the more notable names, so that's great for the Rams overall. Comeback Player of the Year, again, out of all of them, some solid nominees, but with the kind of season that Joe had, he wasn't going to win Offensive Player of the Year, definitely wasn't going to win MVP. So if he was nominated for anything else, based on the numbers and how valuable he was to his team, he was obviously going to win this award. And lastly, Coach of the Year, I thought it was fair to go to Kevin O'Connell. Dan Campbell made a good, run at it, and Dan Quinn also, I thought, I kind of forgot about Dan Quinn, but I thought Dan Quinn would have been a very, very well-deserved, winner of this award, but I'm not upset by Kevin O'Connell, especially with the kind of season that he had, and nobody expected them to be in contention for the number 1 seed with Sam Darnold as the quarterback, and he had a large part in getting Sam to perform the way he did. So a lot of credit goes to him, in building this team as well. So Coach of the Year, another well-deserved winner there. But of course, we got the MVP we got to get to, and it was all about Lamar and Josh. And, during the ceremony, I came to a point where I realized, like Lamar's actually not there. I haven't seen Lamar all night, and then at that moment, it instantly clicked, like, Josh is going to win. Josh is going to win because if Lamar was going to win, at least both of them would be there. So at that point, I knew that it was going to be Josh, because leading up to it, there was a lot of people saying that it was going to be Lamar. He got the first team All-Pro, and usually that gives an indication that he is also going to win the MVP. But, I thought Josh performed well enough to win the MVP as well. And then the final votes came out after Josh was named the winner, and it was very close at 383 to 362 in favor of Josh. And it's the first time since 2003 that a quarterback on the second team All-Pro team won the MVP in the same season. The last guy to do it was Steve McNair. And again, if I was voting, I probably would have went for Josh. And is there voter fatigue? Yes, definitely. And I'm sure that played a big role in some people, voting Lamar for first team All-Pro, then switching over to Josh for MVP. I'm sure that existed, and I probably have some of that as well. But it's not like it was like Lamar put on an A+ performance and Josh put like a C+ performance all year. These guys were very much like A performance, or A- to A-. They were both very much up there. And I do understand the point of one getting first team All-Pro doesn't make sense for the other one to get MVP. I understand that, but I'm not too bothered by it, quite honestly, because I think it just highlights how many great quarterbacks we have nowadays, right? And I don't think it's a bad thing, or I don't really look at it as kind of giving everybody a participation medal when everybody's deserving of it, right? It's not like we have this huge difference, right? We have a huge difference from Patrick to everybody else, but Josh, Lamar, Joe, all those guys are pretty much the same. And if Joe had better numbers, a lot of people probably would have wanted him to win, right? If he made the playoffs and they were in contention for something, Joe would be right up there because he led everything stats-wise for quarterbacks. So, you can sway it whatever way you want. It's a very subjective award, right? It depends on the narrative, and if you really go by the definition, how do you evaluate the value of most valuable player, right? You look at Josh and the expectations that he had coming in, and him not really having like any other Hall of Fame players around him, where Lamar had Derrick Henry come in, right? So that could sway you one way, or you could look at it the same way with Joe. If he had a better record, but he's got guys like Jamar and T. Higgins who are better weapons than what Josh is working with, right? So all those things play a part in it. Again, I'm not too bothered by it, and some people would make the argument too, as my last point, that MVP should just always go to the best player, right? That's what MVP means. Not value to the team, but just the best player. But to that point, if that was the case, then Patrick should get it every year, right? Then there's really no need for people to vote on it. If it just goes to the best player, if it just goes to the player with the best stats, you don't need people to vote on it, because they could just look at the numbers and say, all right, then it's this guy, right? So, you could sway it a million different ways. Again, Lamar and Josh, very deserving of it. I'm not too bothered by it, and I like the fact that Josh won. I think the expectations going into this season to exceed them and to also develop and get to a spot where you were that close to beating Patrick. I'm not, awarding him for an almost victory, but I think the maturity we saw from Josh all throughout the season, and having those MVP kind of moments, against the Lions or the Rams and the 49ers, especially with those cool plays that he made, all of that, you can make a solid argument for all of them. So Josh, very well deserving of the award. And yeah, I'm sure it'll be a very close competition next season as well. These quarterbacks aren't going anywhere, so don't get too annoyed by having the same names up there each and every year. This is only just beginning, I feel like. So those were all the awards, my thoughts on them, and let me know what you guys think of them as well in the comments section. But now we're going to preview the Super Bowl. Finally, after all these days, we're going to get into the information around the game, my predictions, and some key matchups that we're going to look at for the big game coming up on Sunday.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh,
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
We are back here on the Chip Shot Football Podcast to now start talking about the Super Bowl a little bit more in detail, because when we return after this weekend and we're back here doing the shows next week, we'll finally have one team left. Out of all 32, there will be one team left remaining standing over the rest of the league, right? When the Eagles take on the Chiefs in the Super Bowl 59, and it'll be for everything, right? All the marbles, the obvious storylines, right? With the Chiefs playing for history, the Eagles trying to get their revenge, so-and-so, and trying to take advantage of this opportunity, right? And it is something we're going to get into, but to have another chance at playing the Chiefs and knocking them off and, you know, giving this very talented team, this great collection of players, probably the most talented team in the NFL, something to kind of show for all their work that they put in this season. So with that, it was only 2 seasons ago when these two teams played, and the Chiefs came out on top, just to remind you guys, 38-35, despite one of Jalen Hurts' best games of his career, arguably his best game of his career. But they couldn't get it done. That turnover proved to be pretty costly, and then there was that controversial call at the end, and the Chiefs ended up winning by a game-winning field goal, basically. But now the Eagles got this second chance with virtually the same team and adding the ultimate game changer in Saquon Barkley, as well as some very, very, game-changing catalyst kind of rookies as well, in Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, these guys coming on, and development of Nolan Smith, Jalen Carter, and Jordan Davis as well. So it feels like every move that the Eagles have made this offseason has turned into gold each and every time, even especially bringing a guy on like Zach Bond. We mentioned him before, only on a 1-year deal from the Saints. No real, not too many expectations placed on Zach Bond when he was signed, but now, you look at him and he's played like one of the best linebackers in the NFL. Always feels like he's around the ball and always feels like he's making a play some way or the other. So it's been fantastic for the Eagles how everything's worked out for them. But, on the other side, you got the experience of the Kansas City Chiefs, right? They can become the first team ever to win 3 consecutive Super Bowls. They're the first team ever to play in 5 Super Bowls over a 6-year span. And even I would say with more doubt than there was last year, because this year they were dealing with the injuries. The left tackle really wasn't right, and it was a big problem. And, you just really didn't know if they were ever going to get to this point, right? Because at one point you're thinking, all right, they won back-to-back, but, there's been a couple teams that have won back-to-back Super Bowls. So what's going to be the difference with them? Is the fatigue going to catch up with them? Is somebody else going to finally step up? There's no way they make it to a Super Bowl, right? That's never been done. But lo and behold, here we are, and the Chiefs are only 1 win away from standing alone as arguably in some people's minds, the best dynasty in NFL history by doing something nobody's ever done before. And they've done it in a very different way. It's not very Chief-esque, if you would. They don't have the best stats. They don't have the best receivers on their team. The quarterback play wasn't among the best stat-wise, and they won a lot of fine margin games with blocked field goals, game-winning field goals, big calls at the end, big game-winning drives and stuff like that. And despite all the trials and tribulations of this season and the expectations as well, they still finished as the number 1 seed, and they're right back here a year later, a year after year after year, right, the last 3 years. So that's what we're dealing with, a very well-oiled machine that knows just what to do in these big moments, right? They got all the pieces that you need, and they're just running at a different level, at a different efficiency than everybody else, it feels like. But, more in this game. It's going to be fascinating how both just played, but, their styles appear to be different heading into this year as well, because Philly is all about the run game with Saquon and that offensive line very much being highlighted now as one of its most impactful pieces of this team, because before you knew it was probably the best or one of the best in the NFL, but they really couldn't hit their ceiling, because, not to throw shade on Kenneth Gainwell or DeAndre Swift or Miles Sanders or anything like that, but none of them are Saquon Barkley, right? And with Saquon and fitting him in with this offensive line, it just hit levels that nobody thought were even reachable, right? And now we're seeing this identity take over. And last time around, where Jalen threw the ball very well and had a very good game through the air, now, this playoff run, it's not really been about him or A.J. Brown or Devontae Smith. It's all been about Saquon. So they changed their identity a little bit there, and it's worked wonders for them, leading them to this point. And then you look at the Chiefs a little bit, where, again, I kind of touched on it just a second ago, where they got their left guard playing left tackle. They don't even have Rashee Rice playing. They brought back Juju Smith-Schuster. They signed DeAndre Hopkins halfway through the year. Travis Kelce didn't have a historical regular season like he usually does. And, they've evolved into this ultimate game manager sort of team. And that's always been given the negative connotation. But the Kansas City Chiefs, I think they couldn't care less, quite honestly, if they're called game managers or anything like that, because they're very much okay with the level of efficiency, playing mistake-free football, running the ball at a great level, getting 4 to 5 yards each time, and, just going up and down the field like that, right? They have the most amount of 10-plus play drives this season playing. Some people might call it dink and dunk. Some people might call it boring, but I would call it efficient, obviously mistake-free, and it's very adaptable. It's very chameleon-like, where it's able to change and take up very different forms to fit what they're trying to do, what kind of identity they're trying to be that season, right? Because they also brought in Kareem Hunt, Isaiah Pacheco got injured pretty roughly this year. Hollywood Brown wasn't really there at all this year, and they were relying on a rookie wide receiver, and, things that probably would have derailed a lot of other championship teams. The Chiefs just kept trudging along because they're able to be very adaptable and evolve to whatever the circumstance requires. And I think that's something that's not really highlighted in the kind of play, the kind of product that they put out there. So that's also very fascinating to see how we've seen the evolution of this team. Same thing with the Eagles, right? Making this game even more anticipated, I would say. But moving on now to the injuries a little bit, there's not really any for Kansas City. All of their players are expected to be 100%. And for the Eagles, it was a little weird because Jalen Carter was dealing with some sort of illness, but he was a full participant yesterday at practice, and I'm sure he was again today. So the reports are saying he's fine, that he should be good to go, so there's nothing to worry about there. But guys like Devontae Smith, Kenneth Gainwell, and Brandon Graham were all limited this week, but they're also expected to play, right? You'd expect nothing different because, what are they saving themselves for, right? So all those guys are expected to play. Devontae Smith was dealing with a little bit of a hamstring injury, Kenneth Gainwell with a knee injury, and Brandon Graham coming back from what we thought was going to be a season-ending injury to it was either his elbow or his tricep. I think it was something like that. But he looks to be ready to play and come back for what could be his last game as a Philadelphia Eagle. So those are really all the injuries. And also Landon Dickerson and Cam Jurgens were also battling with some injuries during the NFC Championship game, but they don't really appear on the injury report. So they're going to be out there regardless. So we're going to see everybody pretty much at full strength, which leads us to those players being at full strength to now matching them up against each other in the game. And the matchups I'm really looking forward to, one of them out of the three that I have on here is A.J. Brown going up against Trent McDuffie. And I mean, Trent McDuffie could be lined up on mostly anybody, but I feel like that one against AJ is going to be very entertaining to watch because it's best on best. And, how many times are the Chiefs going to play man coverage? And how successful is Trent going to be just on an island over there with AJ Brown? Usually it's a quick, like push off a little bit, slant route, and Jalen Hurts has an easy completion there. Or it's a go ball that AJ Brown's also very good at. And usually that's very hard to stop, right? You don't really have too many times where the corner completely smothers AJ Brown because he's very physical at the point of contact. He's fast, obviously, and has a huge catch radius as well. So for one guy to try and stop him like that, it's going to be a big task. But the Chiefs are certainly going to need something like that in a game where, you're playing for everything. So it's going to be best on best there, and we'll see who wins that matchup on Sunday. And then the second one I'm looking at is the Eagles defensive line against the Chiefs offensive line. Because like I mentioned, you have Joe Thuney out there at left tackle. He's probably going to be trying to block Nolan Smith, who's very fast and very agile off the edge. And then in the middle, you have a backup left guard in there with Caliendo going up against maybe like Jordan Davis, Malik Williams, or across the interior defensive line, Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter against Creed Humphrey, Trey Smith, and then on the other side, you got Jawan Taylor trying to block, I don't even know who would be, like Josh Sweat or something, or maybe Nolan Smith is on that side. They rotate a lot of guys, but that middle part of that defensive line is going to be huge with a backup in there now. And, with those defensive linemen, you'd imagine that a bunch of them are going to be rotating to that side. So how well does Caliendo kind of stick up and stand up to that challenge, right? They're going to need him to because of the offense they run, the RPOs, and just protecting Patrick at all costs, obviously, right? You just don't want him to fuel the pressure every single time. So that's going to be a huge battle to watch. And then the last one, it was going to be easy to just put Saquon against, like, the defensive line of the Chiefs, right? But I'm really looking at Saquon going up against Nick Bolton and Justin Reed, because the defensive line, like, that's the obvious answer, right? But Nick Bolton and how many times he can be in and around the line of scrimmage, and really with a middle linebacker, they're kind of matched up with the running back when you see the lineups out there on the field. And how effective can Nick Bolton be on getting off blocks, at, getting into the backfield and disrupting things, right? Running downhill and blowing up some gap that Saquon's trying to run through, right? And being a menace like that. But also Justin Reed, who does a lot of the similar stuff. He's always in the backfield. He's always coming up and making tackles. And I'm sure he's probably going to be trying to cover Saquon on some possessions as well. Those two guys are the Swiss Army knives for the Chiefs defense, right? They do a lot. They line up in a bunch of different spots. And both of them, you're going to see if the Chiefs are doing a good job at stopping the run. You're going to see number 20 back there and number 32 back there as well, just everywhere across the field trying to keep hold of Saquon. So really those two guys, I'm going to see how involved they are in trying to stop Saquon Barkley on Sunday. But now we get to the prediction, right? Who is going to win Super Bowl 59? I'm going to go with, I think the more I thought about it, I would have been like fine with either team winning. Because the Eagles winning, it'd be like a great culmination, like I said. It would be great for Saquon, right? Also to put a great finish to a historical kind of career-defining season with this team and stuff like that. But I think I'm going to go with Kansas City because history's on their side when you're talking about Super Bowl rematches like this. And I think Steve Spagnuolo is going to have a great game plan against Jalen Hurts in this offense. I think there's going to be some points where he's going to really confuse Jalen, and there's going to be points in this game where you're just admiring how Spagnuolo is deploying his defense and really blurring the picture out there for Jalen Hurts. So I think that's going to be a huge effect on it. And the turnover battle, I think that's been a huge advantage for the Eagles recently. And I know their defense creates a lot of plays, and to that, I just don't think the Chiefs make a lot of mistakes like that. Hardly ever do they make a mistake like that and turn it over, especially in the Super Bowl. So I feel like that advantage, although it might not completely cripple the Eagles, I just feel like if they're not able to get at least one or two turnovers, that they're going to have to play pretty perfect all throughout this game. And I just don't know if they're able to be that flawless in this big of a moment. Quite honestly, for one of the first times this season, I just don't have enough confidence in them to say that they're capable of doing that. I feel like they're going to have their moments, and Jalen's going to make some big throws, but the longevity of it, the consistency of it, I would give that edge to the Chiefs, and kind of managing that throughout an entire game. There's a reason why they're always here and why they always seem to be in the game until the last possible second. So with that, it might be the boring pick, but like, how do you pick against the guy that's almost been to the Super Bowl each and every year he's been in the league, right? I mean, until I see someone beat him, other than Joe Burrow, I can't really go against Patrick. Sorry to anybody that thought I was going to go with the Eagles. So, yeah, I think the Chiefs are going to win. It'll probably be close. I don't think it'll be like a 30-30 kind of situation. Maybe like 28 to 24 or something like that. The Chiefs win. So it's still going to be a great game, still a great matchup to watch. But yeah, I'm going to go with the Chiefs. So that's the official prediction. And now moving on to the rest of the show. Another checkup on the Cincinnati Bengals. Their quarterback Joe Burrow recently talked about all their pending free agents and how he wants to keep all of them, but that's not the problem. It's keeping all of them, or as many as possible, but balancing that with adding a lot of help, especially on the defensive side. Can they do both, or is it unlikely? We're going to answer that question when we return after this.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
All right, guys, we're back on here, and yesterday I found myself watching a little bit of First Take, and, with the Super Bowl coverage and everything, they actually had Joe Burrow on there, and during the interview on First Take, Joe Burrow said, I thought he said it best when he said it was going to be a big offseason this offseason for the Cincinnati Bengals because of the fine line of, I think, of improving this team, if you're not going to change anything with this group, right, if the exact same group of players came back, you got to toe the line between improving this group, but also making sure you keep all the vital pieces from this last group that you had this past season. And the situation with the Bengals is that T. Higgins and Mike Gesicki are both free agents. Jamar Chase wanted a new deal last year. They didn't give it to him. He kind of held out a little bit, but was there for all of the season. He was healthy. He played every single game, so that's a check mark. He also, historical season, Triple Crown winner, another check mark, right? He couldn't have played much better than he did all year, and, you decided to wait a year, and now that price range is probably going to go up a little bit more because he has another leverage point to kind of bring to the table now and say, like, look, you didn't pay me last year. All right, well, I just showed you again why I'm arguably the best receiver in the league and why I did something that only 4 other guys have done in NFL history, right? I should be getting paid like $36 million per year, I'm sure, is going to be the starting point for a discussion. So Jamar Chase, wants a new deal. They're not going to let him leave, so that's probably going to be a lot of money going to Jamar at some point, I'm guessing. But still, not only that, but Trey Hendrickson, who led the league in sacks this year, is entering the last year of his contract here in 2025. And, that's not something you could just find each and every draft, right? Like a generational type of pass rusher. you need that if you want to have any sort of chance at contending for a Super Bowl. And Trey Hendrickson just had a career year, so he's probably, again, similar to Jamar, going to want a little bit extra for kind of compensating him for the kind of season that he just had on a contract that doesn't really pay him what he's deserved. So that's probably their 4 best players outside of Joe, of course, to or that are going to have some serious contract discussions and are going to be making decisions on whether or not they stay or they end up leaving this offseason. So with that possibility, Joe Burrow told The Athletic on, I believe, yesterday. It might have been during Radio Row yesterday or on Wednesday. He was asked a question whether or not he believed the Bengals can keep all of these free agents, and this is what Joe Burrow had to say on that. Joe Burrow said, "We have the cap space to get it done. I want to make it happen. Everybody involved, Trey, T, Jamar, Mike G, we all want to stay together. When you have guys that are motivated like that, I think you can get those things done." So Joe Burrow said that to The Athletic. He also went on First Take, like I mentioned, and he said that, of course, he wants to keep T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, especially because First Take only asked him about those 2 guys. But he, again, reiterated the same message that without any hesitation, he wants all those guys back. And, he doesn't want the Bengals to kind of have this reputation of not keeping some of their best players. It's not a good look, quite honestly. So he wants to make sure he can keep everybody that I just mentioned. And he said he was also willing to kind of restructure his deal, right, because he has a $46 million cap hit this year, to try and get these deals done, right? Not sacrifice, but, also do his part as to making sure he's contributing to keeping these guys on the team. And, with that, it's a great restructuring, and I'm sure they could change some things over to signing bonus and stuff like that, but I'm not so sure it can be changed so much that the total payout at some point is going to have to be, charged to the Bengals, right? They're going to have to pay up on this money that I'm not so sure they're able to pay up at some point, right? The total payout might not change that much with just Joe Burrow restructuring his deal. So, you have to work that out. And, quite honestly, you're talking about some pretty big contracts, right? Like with Jamar, I mentioned $36 million per year, and I don't know the length of it, but that's a lot of money going his way. And, how much guaranteed money also is going to be a big point. And, T. Higgins, he had a quiet, very good year for himself too. So I've heard that the market for him is going to be $30 million. And I'm sure there's going to be some teams bidding for him in free agency that are willing to pay more than that. So it's going to be tough for the Bengals to kind of contradict that and kind of counter those offers. And then, Mike Gesicki, it's not like a household name, one of the best tight ends in the NFL right now, but he had a very good season for them too. He had a good connection with Joe, and on a 1-year deal, he was a pretty, important piece for them as well. So he might not cost the same, but, I think that you'd want to prioritize the other guys a little bit earlier, but then maybe by that point, Mike Gesicki might not be there to try and re-sign. And then we get to Trey Hendrickson, Trey, for the kind of money that pass rushers are making, I think it's around 24 million at least. Joe is saying that you can keep all of them, and I might agree with that. I could probably see that happening, right? With some restructuring, I lose track of how these franchises actually shift around this money to afford, players like this, but it's not really just about keeping these guys, right? In an ideal world, all these guys have to stay, but because of how everything's played out and the timing of it all, the Bengals kind of pushing these things back a little bit, you want to keep all these players, but because you want to keep them all, it still doesn't erase the fact that you got to make some major improvements and additions to this team, right? Like all 4 of these guys were on the team this past year, and they still missed the playoffs. So not only do you want all of them back to kind of stay within that range, but you have to get better. And if you don't add anybody and all your money goes allocated to these 4 guys, then you're not really going to get too much better other than, I guess, the draft, right? Bringing in some pretty talented guys, I'm sure that's possible. I think they have the 17th pick this year or something like that, and you can get a lot of talented guys there. But in free agency and things like that, I'd imagine that they'd want to bring some guys back in free agency. I know Mike Hilton is another one that's a free agent, and he's not really being talked about as much, but he was a pretty big piece for them too. So not only is this defense going to lose one of its most important players, you might not be able to bring in a lot of help to help that defense. So instead of adding to it, one of its most important pieces could potentially leave. So that's kind of the internal discussions that they're going to have, right? Yes, you want to keep all these great players, and I'm sure they're going to definitely keep Jamar, right? Like, Jamar's going to stay, but then everybody else, I don't really see how they're going to fit everything in and still make some pretty drastic improvements to this team on the defensive side, mostly. So that's really the biggest thing with all of this, and how you kind of balance that in this situation where, the AFC is loaded and the division's loaded. So, how do you toe that line and still remain relevant with the Ravens, who are probably going to bring back most of the same team? The Steelers are probably going to bring back most of the same team. They're still dealing with a quarterback situation, but that's not any different than last offseason, to be quite honest with you. And, bigger picture, you're not really just competing with them. That the Texans are getting better. The Chargers are going to get better. The Broncos seem to be on the uprise as well. Then you have your big hitters like the Bills, and the Chiefs obviously aren't going anywhere. So you got to deal with all of that. And it just feels like the Bengals are in a weird spot right now where they got to make some tough decisions, and you could potentially, I could potentially see someone like Mike Gesicki leaving just because they might not be able to afford him, or not afford him, but I probably do mean afford, because, if all this money is going to Jamar, and Trey Hendrickson is also another one I probably wouldn't let leave out that door, you might not have enough for Mike if you want to make improvements on the defensive side with some very good free agents out there on the defensive line, at linebacker that we've already talked about, and there's a lot of corners out there too, all things that the Bengals need. So you might have to part ways with Mike Gesicki, and do you bring back Mike Hilton at that point? And there's a lot of tough decisions that they have to do. So if I were to choose and kind of make a prediction, I don't think they're going to be able to bring back everybody. I'd assume it would probably be Mike Gesicki to leave, and potentially Mike Hilton as well. But yeah, these contract negotiations aren't going to go by quickly. Not at all. I think it's probably going to take to close to the draft to probably get something done. So yeah, Jamar Chase has already talked about how he wants to get paid accordingly. Same thing with Trey Hendrickson. He feels like he should have a better contract, and if not, then he would probably be looking to move on from the Bengals. So very sensitive and touchy subjects coming up for the Bengals this offseason. And again, Joe's sentiment rings very loudly. Like, this offseason is going to be huge for the Cincinnati Bengals. So a lot of big decisions coming up. And speaking of big decisions, not only for the Bengals, but also for a team that exceeded expectations this year, like the Vikings, but in the end, they crashed out of the playoffs in a very, very harsh way. So we are going to talk about the Vikings in our next segment and talk about some spots where I think they need the most improvement to stay relevant and stay in that area of relevancy for being one of the best teams in the NFC. How can they do that? Who can they add? We're going to answer that when we return right after this.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Jumping back into the action now here on Friday, February 7th, here at the end of the week, and we're going to continue our series that we've had for the last few days now, talking about some early improvements that we can identify for every team in the NFL. We're going to go through all of them as the days go by, and we're on the Minnesota Vikings this time around because I missed out on them when I was talking about the NFC North. I forgot to include them, so I skipped over them. So we're circling back around and talking about the Vikings today. So despite all the uncertainties coming in around Minnesota this year, mainly around Sam Darnold, right, because that's a huge piece at the quarterback spot, they certainly, despite Sam, right, excluding him, they certainly proved tons of people wrong this year with how great they played, and just the idea that they were always just so consistent. Yeah, they had a couple games that we would have liked back, that I'm sure they would have liked back as well, but for the most part, staying in that range of competing for the number one seed and staying, kind of step for step with the Lions was something that I don't think should just be kind of brushed over, right? The Lions were killing people this year, but despite that, the Vikings kept pace with them pretty well, and the team overall was well built. There was a lot of great performances. The defense played great with Brian Flores at the helm, but also bringing Sam Darnold back into this discussion, right? He had a career year, one of the best. They had one of the best records in their division, one of the best records in their conference, and getting the most out of Sam was definitely a big achievement because, again, this is a guy that everybody thought was just going to be a backup quarterback for the rest of his career, right? And he lands in Minnesota, not a lot of expectations, right? A lot of the buzz is around J.J. McCarthy, and then it's devastating when he gets hurt. Now Sam is going to have to play, and he exceeded all expectations. So they had a great year overall. Yes, it didn't end how they wanted it to, right? Losing the way they did in the playoffs to the Los Angeles Rams, but I wanted to focus on the two spots I feel like they could upgrade the most to still, despite the loss and despite this end of the season, still be in a good spot to kind of continue it next season. And I could have put quarterback in here, right, because we don't know what's going to happen with Sam, but I think that answer's kind of limited and narrowed down to J.J. McCarthy's either going to play quarterback or they're probably going to bring Sam Darnold back anyway. So I wasn't going to talk too much about it because I didn't think there was that many options, right? It's going to be one of the two, I feel like. So yes, quarterback is one, but overall, I think the next two are a little bit more important. And yeah, I mean, the first one I wanted to talk about is their secondary, because this secondary could look very different next year, right? With their top 4 defensive backs are currently free agents. They're going to be free agents once March hits. So their best 4 defensive backs are not going to be there, and their 2 starting safeties also are on expiring deals as well. So that's quite literally all of their secondary players are going to be on the market. And a guy like Byron Murphy seems to be the most likely to return. At least it's the one that I would negotiate with first to make sure that he definitely doesn't leave. But guys like Shaquille Griffin and Stephon Gilmore are also going to be testing the market, and they're more of a toss-up, right? I don't know how strong the Vikings feel about bringing back a older Stephon Gilmore and a Shaquille Griffin that, wasn't terrible, but I don't know. It's not a guy that I'm sure they're prioritizing too much, or at least I'm not quite sure about it. So those are more of a toss-up there. And also, you look at their two safeties and their longtime veteran captain player, Harrison Smith, is set to be a free agent. And, what kind of discussions are they going to have there with him? I don't think he's considering retirement, but I'm not quite sure. And then also their other starting safety, Cam Bynum, is going to be a free agent as well. So all of their secondary has quite literally just stepped out the door, and they're testing free agency a little bit here. So that's obviously something you got to pay a lot of attention to. But luckily for them, this free agent class has a lot of, and I mean like a lot of potential replacements for some guys that you might lose, or just some guys that you want to add to this group anyway, right? Because if you do, let's say you lose Stephon Gilmore or Shaquille Griffin, you could, there's tons of corners like DJ Reed, Charvarius Ward, Carlton Davis, Rasul Douglas, Asante Samuel, Paulson Adebo, and Mike Hilton is also out there, right? There's so many corner options that the Vikings can explore with a lot of these free agents. And then as safety, the safety could be the same thing. I really like the idea of Javon Holland coming over to Minnesota. I think he could be something awesome for them to have on the back end. He has some familiarity with Brian Flores, so that could be something super exciting for them, for him to rejoin his old coach there, and that secondary, that very talented defense. I really like that pairing. Or you have a guy like Talanoa Hufanga from the 49ers who's going to be a free agent. He could be on the move as well. Or Trevon Merrick is another one from the Raiders. Young guy, I think he's only 25, 26, that they could also explore if they do lose out on Harrison Smith or Cam Bynum. There's a ton of guys in this free agent class that they could sign. They have the seventh most cap space at $58 million heading into this year, so they got a little space to play around with, of course. So that is going to be something interesting to follow. But also in the draft, right? Like they're picking at number 24, and around that spot, there could be a lot of exciting prospects, like a Benjamin Morrison out of Notre Dame. He's probably going to drop a little bit because of that hip injury that he suffered, so he could be just sitting there for them. Or a guy like Jahdae Barron from Texas is another one. Azare Thomas, I hope I said his first name right, the Florida State University corner, who's getting a lot of attention from the Senior Bowl a couple weeks ago, and he's getting a lot of attention, and I'm sure he's going to be there at the later part of the first round, so he would be somebody that would fit in right away. And in terms of safeties, I mean, you got Nick Emenwari from South Carolina, who could be interesting, but I think for safety, I'd rather go like I said, with like a Javon Holland or something like that, and maybe try to bring back Cam Bynum. But yeah, I mean, they're very fortunate that there's a lot of secondary players at their disposal, not only, in the draft and in free agency as well. Maxwell Hairston is another one from Kentucky that a lot of people like, or Siobhan Revel from South Carolina, I believe, as well. There's tons of guys that could be there for the Vikings. So very fortunate that that's a need for them this year, where they could resupply in very good quality if they so choose. But the other spot I wanted to talk about was interior defensive line, maybe like defensive tackle, if you will. But that middle part of the defensive line is going to be important because they got Jalen Redmond, who's going to be a free agent, Jerry Tillery as well, and Jonathan Bullard, who are all going to be free agents. And they all played pretty decent minutes this year. And, with all of them potentially leaving, and the fact that this team got shredded by the Detroit Lions in the last game of the regular season, really by Jahmyr Gibbs, you need to fortify that, like, urgently, I would say, right? So you need, if you can bring two of those guys back, that would be great. But in free agency, we've talked about plenty of options that are out there, like Poona Ford, Oza Adigizua, Milton Williams are the big three that are really in the middle part of that interior defensive line that I'm sure would be very interesting for the Minnesota Vikings to explore. But There's even more options in the draft, right? You got guys like Walter Nolan from Ole Miss, Kenneth Grant from Michigan, Derek Harmon from Oregon, and there's another defensive tackle from Toledo, Darius Alexander, who has gotten a lot of good reviews over his Senior Bowl performance a couple weeks ago as well. So even he could be another option if you want to wait on him, maybe to the second round. So again, another spot where they're very fortunate that, the draft and free agency have a lot of deep classes of secondary players and interior defensive linemen. So these two are the biggest issues I see for the Minnesota Vikings, and I'm hoping that they're aggressive in both of these instances and get some good guys in there. Like I ideally would like, if I'm the general manager, I would like to bring in Cam Bynum, Javon Holland, and like Milton Williams, let's say. I want to bring Milton Williams and re-sign Jerry Tillery and draft somebody like Derek Harmon in the first round. I think that something along those lines would be fantastic for this team. Of course, the contract negotiations aren't that easy, obviously, but in an ideal world, that's who I'd like to see on the Minnesota Vikings this next year for these positions. So we'll see where they go from here. I mean, they're right there, right? I think that it was very disappointing with how, the performance ended last season, but it doesn't discredit me or make me doubt them anymore, just because, yes, it was a bad ending, but I can't ignore, their offense that they have. I really like Kevin O'Connell as a play caller, and defensively, they got some guys like Alex Van Ginkel, Jonathan Grenard played awesome. So they got a lot of talent on that side, and they're right there, I believe, in a very tough division to kind of play the way they did. I'm confident in them. And the quarterback position, I also have confidence in Kevin O'Connell to get that right. If it's even J.J. McCarthy, I'm really not sweating it too much. I think very highly of J.J. So, yeah, very exciting times, hopefully, for the Minnesota Vikings coming up. But for us on this show, we got one more segment to get to. Just a quick question to everybody before we head to the Super Bowl. Who is under more pressure? Is it the Eagles to win this year, or is it the Kansas City Chiefs chasing history? Very simple question that we're going to answer. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Thank you guys for joining me here on the last segment, the last episode before Super Bowl 59. And with that in mind, I just wanted to leave you guys with this last question, right? Because throwing everything we think about this game aside, like the coaches, the players, the scheme talk, the matchups and things like that, I wanted to talk about what a win or a potential loss would mean for both of these teams. And I would say there might not be a more pressure-filled Super Bowl in the last 13 seasons than this one. Maybe since like the 2012 Giants-Patriots one, or or maybe even like last year with the 49ers, right? And this idea of beating the Kansas City Chiefs this second time that they've played them. But along those lines, right, we're talking about this question, right? Who is under more pressure to win this game? And first, you look at the Kansas City Chiefs, obviously chasing a three-peat, and a victory would automatically cement them a single special place for them as the only team ever to achieve a three-peat and put them in the conversation very seriously of being the best dynasty in NFL history. Because if they're able to get 3, who am I to say that they can't get 4, right? Like, nobody thought they'd get 3. What makes me think they're not going to get 4? That's the kind of company and circumstances we're talking about with the Chiefs, right? If they get this, like, anything is possible, quite honestly, for them and how far they could take this thing, because Andy Reid's not going anywhere, and neither are Patrick and probably not Travis for another season or two, and they're only going to get better, right? That's the crazy part. So that's what would happen with a victory, but a loss, would push this team and this dynasty talk back a few years, certainly, and they join the group of failed three-peat attempts, right? With the Steelers in there, I believe the Cowboys in there as well, and the Patriots certainly in there. So, yeah, I mean, they would just join a group of other guys that were also there but just couldn't get it done, right? That's a lot to deal with, right? To the pressure of history and cementing yourself like that. They say they don't think about it, or they say they don't talk about it, but I find it very hard to believe that it's not like constantly in the back of some of these players' heads, like this is legendary kind of stuff, right? It could get to you, right, in terms of pressure. But then you look at the other side with the Eagles, and I think the Eagles have a very interesting circumstance here with this game, because it would be the perfect ending to a dominant season for, I think, the most talented roster I've probably seen in a good amount of time. And they'd get this win over the team that beat them 2 seasons ago, a team that they feel that they should have beaten last time, but they obviously didn't. So it would feel great to kind of get some measure of revenge there. And that would be a win, right? That would be a great win for not only this team, but for guys like Jalen, obviously, Nick Sirianni, right, getting a lot of scrutiny. It would be huge for them to get a Super Bowl win. And I mean, that's the good part about it. But the negative part, kind of reminds you of San Francisco last year, where they get a second crack at the Kansas City Chiefs, who beat them the first time around. And you got a lot of returning players. You outmatch the Kansas City Chiefs, right? I think most people would say that the Eagles have a better team. You go down the line, position for position, and you'd say that the Eagles have the majority advantage at almost all of them, except maybe quarterback, right? But still falling short again. And you look at the 49ers and how that affected them this year, right? You fall short again, you think, like, this can't be happening. There's no way I just lost to the same group, same guys twice, and now we got to start this whole thing over again. And then next season comes, and, I mean, you look at the 49ers, and they were nowhere near it this year, right? So that's kind of what the Eagles are battling with, right? The idea of not taking this opportunity for granted. And I talked about this a little bit with the Bills, right? Like you were right there so close, but when you have 4 cracks at it, like the Bills have had, there's no guarantee whatsoever that you're going to get that again. And of course they want to win these games, but to lose all 4 of them if you're the Bills, and then like you're in a very weird spot where you're like, am I going to get another chance at it? Quite honestly, that's what I'd be thinking. And then with the Eagles, right, there's no guarantee that they make it back to another Super Bowl for who knows how long. And that's where I wanted to get to with the history aspect of this, because there's a lot of history with a Super Bowl rematch, especially in this context with the Eagles and the Kansas City Chiefs, that I thought was super interesting to know of, right? So follow me here, right? Because in a Super Bowl rematch, the winner of the first Super Bowl won the rematch every single time when you're talking about rematches being played within a 10-year span. And this is the 6th time in NFL history that two teams have played each other in a Super Bowl within that 10-year span, right? This is the 6th time that it's happened. And like I just said, in those 5 other instances, the first team has won the rematch every single time. Every single time, the team that won the first game always won the second game, right? So aside from, the Eagles rematch, obviously this year with the Chiefs, we're not counting that. The other different instances where there's been that Super Bowl rematch that I mentioned within a 10-year span, after the first victory, also won the second game, right? So after the first team won the first game, they also won the second game. After that, the loser of those 2 games, of the first one and the rematch, has not returned to a Super Bowl for at least another 15 years, right? All those 5 other instances, the same team lost both of them, and the next time they made it to a Super Bowl, no one's been able to do it for at least 15 years, right? And that team was the Dallas Cowboys. After they lost back-to-back Super Bowls to the Steelers, they never made it back until 15 years later. And you also can exempt the Patriots because, that's the dynasty, right? We're going to exempt them because there's not a lot of dynasties, just being thrown out there. So they also don't fall in that category. Yes, they lost back-to-back games like that, but they made it back in 3 years, right? We're talking about one of the best teams ever. We can exempt them. And the other team also is the 49ers, but they lost the first game, they lost the rematch, and now it's still to be determined, right, when they're going to get back to a Super Bowl. It could be in another 20 years, right, or something like that. The other teams were the Bengals, who lost back-to-back games within a 10-year span, back-to-back Super Bowls, to the 49ers, and they didn't make it back for another 31 years. And the Bills, same thing. They lost back-to-back Super Bowls to the Cowboys, and they also haven't made it back since. It's been 31 years since the Bills have been back after losing that rematch to the same team in the Super Bowl. So the Eagles could join that group, right? If they don't win, and history, again, is not on their side, because I just said every time they play this rematch within a 10-year span, the first team always wins the rematch. It's happened every single time so far. And if that does happen, the Eagles could be in this group of, you get another chance at it, you don't get it done again, and then you don't really know when you're going to be back in the Super Bowl, right? It's a real possibility, and I know how good the Eagles are. Believe me, they're probably not going anywhere, right? None of their players are leaving, I would assume, but again, you just never know, right? You just never know. You think in a 3-year span, like we've seen already, that the Eagles were in a very close game with the Chiefs. Now they have another chance at it, and they're a lot better this time around. But if they don't get it done, right, and, it's very disappointing again, and now you have to do it all over again, and not only do it all over again on your own efforts and merit, you look at the Lions are going to get better. We just talked about the Vikings getting better. The Commanders and Jaden Daniels, right, they're just getting started, and they're going to attract a lot of people. The Buccaneers, probably not going anywhere either. They're going to be just as challenging. The Rams, I have a lot of confidence in as well. The Packers probably are going to get better too. Like this idea that a very talented team like this, and in terms of who's under the most pressure, if you can't tell already, I think it's the Eagles, because when you're in a situation like this, and I don't think the Eagles are taking it for granted or anything like that, but like you never know until it hits you after a game like this. Like, man, am I ever going to get back there again? I'm sure a lot of people think like that after one Super Bowl, right? It might not hit you right after, but soon, at some point, you're thinking, I have to get back there again, right? I have to get it done the next time around. And then now that you're here and you have this opportunity to fail again and try to do it all over again, the emotional toll and the external factors that you have no control over, right? And even the injuries and things like that, right, makes it extremely tough for you to come back in who knows how long, right? All these other examples that I gave at least took over a decade to come back. So I think that's a real opportunity, a real possibility, I should say. And it reminds you of that quote from Dan Campbell last year when they were in the NFC Championship game, and he just reminded everybody, like this could be the only time we ever come here, right? And I think a lot of people, when you're talking about questions like this, kind of exclude that, because you look at this Eagles roster and you think, like, bro, they're going to get back here every year, right? The Chiefs are under more pressure, you would think, but I'm really cautious about that idea that just because you have a good roster, especially in football and a long season like this, you never know what's going to happen, right? They always say no team is exactly the same, and that's very true. So all these other factors and changes that you naturally go through could end up affecting you for who knows how long. So that's why I feel like the Eagles are under not a lot more pressure, but more pressure than the Kansas City Chiefs, because yes, they've won a Super Bowl in recent memory, but the Chiefs are very much dominating the 2020s, basically, right? So this has been an era where they've really had a stronghold over this game and these circumstances. So the Chiefs are going to have to overcome a lot, right? And they're also dealing with a lot heavier circumstances, I feel like, than the Chiefs are. So just a discussion for you guys to kind of go into the weekend and head into the Super Bowl. Just thinking, about this discussion we just had and kind of thinking about it during the Super Bowl. So with that being said, that will be the end of today's show. I want to thank you guys for joining me, as always, on the Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. If you want to catch more of this show, check out both YouTube channels, the GSMC Sports Network channel and the GSMC Podcast Network channel, where you could also like, follow, and subscribe to the show as well on there, and just check out more content covering the NFL with me, Manny Maradiaga, as your host. More discussions, breaking news, off-season, free agency, coming up, and the draft, all being covered each and every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. So I hope you guys have an awesome weekend. I hope you really enjoy the Super Bowl. I know I will, and we'll be back here again next week to talk endlessly about what we saw this upcoming Sunday.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn it.